Hello and welcome here to Best of the West, a podcast here for Blake Street Banner. I am your host, Skylar Timmons, along here with my fellow homie here in the Best of the West. It's Kenneth Weber. Kenneth, how you doing?
Good to see you again. It's nice that baseball seems to still have something to talk about each week. There's a lot of off seasons where there's just nothing going on during winter meetings during New Year's, and there's a lot of action. So it's refreshing this off season so far.
Yeah, that stove is hot. It is a lot of action happening, trades all over the place, and signings and little minor league deals. There's a lot of action, like you said, more than there's been in the past, which
Yeah,
is pretty nice.
we even got a draft pick traded recently too. I mean, so like that's how weird things are getting right now. Is we're not just moving big leaguers and prospects; we're flipping draft picks at this point. So.
Yeah, that big one with the Kyle Tucker going to the Chicago Cubs. Astros get Cam Smith, who was a 2024 draft pick,
Mm-hmm.
heads over to the Astros.
Yeah, recent pick, but that was also between Tampa Bay and the A's, the Oakland, the Sacramento, the Vegas A's, however you want to phrase it. But they acquired Jeffrey Springs, so like they flipped a comp balance pick, which is 32nd or something
Yeah,
overall to Tampa Bay. So, but that Kyle Tucker one, that's a huge move. It's like a Juan Soto no sugar kind of
yeah,
move. Where it's like the Yankees picked up Juan Soto, they had the year of exclusive negotiation. Cubs are kind of doing the same thing, but they also weren't like a league championship team before this. They're
yeah,
just trying to get into the playoffs. So that's a
yeah,
unique one.
yeah. But lots of action going around, and it's pretty fun. Like you said, it gets really cold this time of year, especially these past couple of years. But the big names coming off the board, we're getting a lot of nice little moves. It's fun to talk about. But we're not here to talk about the rest of the league. We're going to talk about the National League West primarily, and a team that's looking to be moving into a nice pole position, or at least trying to make some moves in the National League West that we touched on a little bit last week, but even more so, it's the San Francisco Giants. And specifically, what we wanted to talk about here was their new president of baseball operations, former catcher, future Hall of Famer, I would even say, Buster Posey, who is really now in charge of the Giants. And he's been making some interesting moves here in this offseason. Kenneth, it seems like Buster is determined to really make the Giants in his own image, or really how he feels they can be with a good vision.
Well, I mean, this was the captain of the dynasty, and it's you don't get a lot of dynasties in baseball necessarily. So having the Giants win 3 out of 5, Buster Posey was the poster boy. He was the face of that franchise and that period. And so for him to turn around and immediately put his imprint, I mean, at least he's got a pretty good understanding of the subject and of the material, but it feels a little uncharted. You know, thinking in prep of this podcast, you have like Jerry DePoto, a former player who's a general manager. You know, former Rockies great Jerry DePoto, and then like Billy Bean is a former player, but it's not as common to have former players, much less have them be presidents of baseball operations
Mhm.
and also have them be the hometown icons, because I think that's where it bleeds over to, like, you look at the Avalanche with Joe Sakic, let's
Yeah.
say, and building the image, John Elway with the Broncos. It's not as common in baseball, so I think that it's also something that we don't fully understand, maybe how that's respected from players out there. Oh, you have Buster in charge. You have somebody who's been there, who's done that. Maybe that alone changes the Giants' image and makes them a much more attractive place to go than they were this time last year.
Yeah, because we see like players like Buster, who's no, they're just kind of helping out in the front office after they've retired. They're
Mhm.
doing some things. We see that with the Rockies. A lot of these teams, they'll get their former players. They're just maybe helping out in the clubhouse. They're being special assistants. They're coaching somewhere. They're
Vinny
in
was a
the
bench coach with the
yeah.
Rockies. Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're good. And so yeah, like you're saying, seeing these, we're seeing I think a few more players reaching up. There's Craig Breslow over with the Red Sox. We got Chris Young over with the Rangers. Guys that are making some interesting moves. These former players who are coming in and maybe starting to share some experience at some of these top levels. And say what you will, Jerry DePoto, dude's been active on the trade market, doing everything he can to maybe try and get the Mariners to where he wants them to be. So having Buster in charge of the Giants, he's got that experience. The all longtime catcher, led that dynasty, rookie of the year, MVP, World Series champion, spent his entire career behind the dish and at first base with the Giants. It's cool to see what experiences he can bring to the table heading up the entire operation. And so far, I like what he's been doing so far in his and reading up interviews and things that he's trying to do. It's trying to build guys that are gritty, are going to a more well-rounded team of guys that can get in there every day and maybe a little less micro, nitpicky things of platooning this guy and we're going to cut corners here and then maybe we'll flip in this guy here, but trying to get a more well-established lineup, kind of like when he was playing.
Yeah, I will say it's not that I don't think Buster Posey hasn't had any input up to this point. So it's
Yeah.
not like, the a Posey influence is coming out of nowhere. But I think it's also, if Buster Posey had the final say over the past couple of years, you wouldn't have, Lamont Wade Jr. being your leading starter at three different
Yeah.
positions in 3 different seasons, kind of thing,
Yeah.
So I think that this is more Buster now has the final say, and Buster. Uh, I can't stop making Arrested Development jokes in my head saying Buster so much. But he now gets the final say, and I think that there is something more in his image. But again, also with one of the most accomplished playing resumes to back it up. So I think that that is it's just a heck of a starting point. Honestly, I think for the Giants as a franchise when approaching players now is you have somebody of recent memory who is spearheading the operation. So if ever there's a player's manager, general manager, president of baseball operations, like there is a player's manager, um, you think Posey fits that bill.
Yeah, and he's the youngest member of the Giants ownership group. He's the first former player in franchise history to join the organization, doing all kinds of this cool stuff as a principal partner. He's on that board of directors, hires his former teammate Randy Wynn. So he's doing things. He's got that influence. He's ingrained into the Giants, and now he's even more so there at the top with that really hands-on thing. And I think that's what he came to the Giants to say. I want a hands-on thing with this team. I want to get back into it. I didn't think I was going to want to, but after his couple of years with the organization, it's like, no, I want to be more involved. And now he's getting that opportunity. And I think what really helped kick that off is that signing of Willy Adames that we talked about a little bit last week, of how maybe impactful and kind of a direction he wants to take this team, of getting a more well-established, just I guess regularity with the team. Uh, he wants to be like those old Jamie Lee Curtis commercials. Want to make sure they're nice and regular with with that activity.
Yeah, I'm glad you're calling something so recent to mind. Um, but no, I think that I think the way I phrased it last week is the Giants were always the bridesmaid, never the bride with the free agent spending. So I think that is part of it. When it comes to Buster Posey and the influence and the acquisitions or the contract side, I think the conversation almost starts with Matt Chapman and getting the extension done, where it was kind of the right place and the right time for both the team and the player, and it just made a lot of sense on both sides. Where that now got secured, Luciano, excuse me, is not looking like he's going to be a big league regular. They need to address shortstop.
Mhm,
Adames is a bit of a polarizing guy because he's never been the star, but he's always produced at an all-star level kind of thing.
mhm.
So it gave them, it secured the left side of the infield. I think there's still a lot of work to be done with this roster, but I think it's also, you feel that it's improving more than it's just relying on black magic, which has kind of been the Giants' MO over the past couple of years.
Yeah, you get some nice solid guys and they're gritty guys. We got a question here in the chat from Isaac Stevens. Would you guys trust a guy like Charlie Blackmon to take over baseball ops for the Rockies? What do you think, Kenneth?
I think that when it comes to those special assistant roles, I think that that's like a perfect opportunity. That's perfect involvement. I don't think everybody is made to go from a everyday blue collar player into basically a corporate CEO, which is
Mhm.
the transition that's occurring from Posey's playing days to a president of baseball ops. So, do I think Charlie Blackmon would have a great influence when it comes to the day to day operations and being able to add support to how that should look and be structured? Heck yeah. But do I think Charlie Blackmon is going to be the perfect one when it comes to everything around Blake Street as well and sit in those McGregor Square meetings?
Yeah.
Maybe not. So that's you keep the good people around. I think Blackman's going to be one of those guys, but I could also see Blackman wanting to be like Todd Helton, and then he just runs off to the woods and wants to be by himself, and that's just the way he prefers it.
Yeah. It's an interesting one. If I had to pick a former Rocky, part of me just kind of gravitates towards Ryan Spielborg's.
Okay.
Just he's just of that mindset of approaching and just how he approaches baseball and just his mindset of constructing teams and being in his broadcast world. And he's really been diving into analysis and all that good stuff. I feel like I feel like he'd be a decent one. Maybe
I
not
agree.
best.
I agree with that, and I think Sullivan is not too far behind either. And I think that a common theme that could happen with guys like that, those are talented baseball players, but they had to kind of be at their best to become big leaguers. Somebody like Cargo, where they just had just oozing with talent overall. It's a little bit different because they're like, I didn't have to think, I just did it. And then somebody else like Spilly or Sullivan is much more technical. It's somebody who had to understand the game up and down. And those are usually the guys that become the managers too, as
Yeah,
opposed to you know just raw talent alone.
yeah,
Bryce Harper could say, just do it like me, but no, there is no Bryce Harper kind of thing. So they don't always become the best coaches.
yeah. No, there's a lot of options there, but rounding out here with the Giants, has Buster Posey impressed you enough so far in this limited sample size where perhaps it's got us rethinking, oh, maybe the Giants are in a position to really surpass the D-backs and the Padres heading into 2025 and even further beyond with some of these early moves that he's made and maybe some of his intentions moving forward.
I think it definitely makes them stronger candidates. I think when it comes to the Diamondbacks, there's a lot of unknown. They'll just go from ice cold to scorching hot, and that's the way the last 2 years have gone. One year carried them all the way to the World Series. The other, they didn't even make it to the playoffs. So they're kind of, that's more of an indictment on Arizona.
Mhm.
Um, San Diego has its own questions. I don't think that I look at the Giants situation right now and say that yes, for sure, I could see them being a better team than the Padres at this point.
Mhm.
So it's trending in the right direction. I don't think it's enough to catch the Padres, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of winter to go.
Yeah, no, that's kind of where I am. Where the Giants, they're on that right trajectory, but there's still some things they have to shore up. As a team, Joe, just a few more things I would say, and then it's just really capitalizing during the season and figuring out how to dominate, really get that offense rolling a little bit more because that off Giants offense has honestly not been their strong suit. It's mostly because of where they play,
Mhm.
and so there's a few more things they still need to do, I think, to figure out before they can really surpass them. I think they're trending with them. They're maybe even kill with them, and that 2 through 4 uh, rankings in the division is really where there's going to be a little bit more of a battle there.
Yeah, I think even right now, with where it stands, you could mention any of those three teams, and you can make an argument for any one of the 3 to finish 2, 3rd, or 4th,
Yeah,
2nd, 3rd, or 4th, so it wouldn't be a surprise much. I think you don't really know how much you have with Jung-Hoo Lee yet. Maybe he is that right piece for that right stadium because, yeah, it's gonna suppress power, playing it at Pac Bell or whatever they call it now. But there is the trade-off where you are going to get better pitching, as a byproduct. And so,
yeah,
if they want to splurge and go Burns, even obviously that raises them to another level. But they're going to be more fortunate at preventing runs because of where they play. And right now, they're in a decent shape for it. Adames, Chapman, and maybe someone like Lee stepping in and being, a middle of the order anchor, okay, now you see what they're working with. But I think that you need to see more out of somebody like Lee. I think Heliot Ramos was a really good hitter in the second half last year, and I think that there is a good bat there. But are these the guys, And is Adames going to be a 30, 35 home run threat kind of guy moving from Miller Park to San Francisco? So, that's the questions with this team, and I think they all have their own questions that could make them second place teams, could make them fourth place
Yeah.
teams, but everybody agrees they're better than the Rockies.
Yeah.
So,
That's an evergreen topic.
yeah,
Well, I think so far in his first little stint, I think Buster Posey's got something cooking, and it'll be interesting to see how as he continues to make things, do things with his GM and his whole team, what else they can cook up and pull off to really get this team back to where they hope it is. Back during those really, they've just been that weird team where they'll be really good or they'll sneak into the playoffs and make it to a World Series. They'll have that voodoo run of 107 wins and take the West, or they'll win around 500 like they did in 2024. But Buster's, he's got his work cut out for him, but he seems like that good, smart guy, as catchers often are, who
yeah.
really do something special with the Giants and get them back to their glory days.
They still have 2 years and $50 million remaining on Robbie Ray. Oof, that's a rough.
Boy,
Like they'll have money to spend, but that's a rough one on their books. So
yeah,
it's going to be a process. I don't see them leapfrogging the Dodgers anytime soon or being any real candidates to do that. But in the meantime, they could be an NL wildcard team. Yeah, but it's clear they still have more work to do. I think before you can confidently say that this is a playoff team.
absolutely. Yeah, interesting stuff coming over in the Bay. But someone wanted to transition to here. We'll move to the desert now, out to the Diamondbacks. And like we talked about a little bit last week, the Diamondbacks, we're not quite sure exactly what they're doing this offseason. It's been pretty quiet for them. There's mostly been talk of potentially trading starting pitching from their starting rotation, particularly Jordan Montgomery. There had been talks of a trade of Montgomery for Bellinger deal that was nixed on the Cubs side. So that fell through. That would just been probably a straight up just, we're going to swap these salaries
Mhm.
type of thing. Bellinger could have fit in nicely there, but you know, it's interesting to just see what the Diamondbacks are just trying to do. But what are your thoughts here with Jordan Montgomery, especially? I think he's the one that is of the most interest of what are the Diamondbacks doing with him.
Yeah, it's hard not to get carried away with the thought that the owner is hell bent on getting rid of that
Mhm.
contract, and like that's priority numero uno for the organization. So you could look at it and assume that they're more professional than that. I think Montgomery, it was such a long and drawn out um, signing process. I
Mhm.
think the season had already actually started, if not, we're
Yeah.
well into spring training. And it was writing a postseason run before last year or, 2 years ago. How well regarded was Jordan Montgomery? How much was Jordan Montgomery in the conversation of an ace caliber pitcher, an all-star caliber pitcher? So there were some ups and downs in a strong big league career, but finally got his bank after a huge postseason run and went back to being who he was. So I think it can't be worse than it was last year. Too
Yeah.
high expectations, too distorted of a lead in to his season. I think some familiarity and some progression to the mean will happen. That said, I don't think you're getting 2022 postseason Texas Rangers Jordan Montgomery anytime soon either, and that's what they paid for. So this team can improve on the pitching side. Um, if you want to bank on Montgomery doing that, doesn't sound like they want it to. Merrill Kelly really didn't get a whole lot of run last year for them. Getting a return for him is going to be something really nice that will improve the Diamondbacks' fortune. So they have a little bit more depth than you realize just because everything went so wrong last year.
Yeah.
Um, but that doesn't mean they're not walking into 2025 with a lot of unknowns or question marks in that same pitching rotation.
Yeah, and I think that's the question to pose is do they really have enough depth with the rotation that they could afford to be trading a starting pitcher? Because currently over at Roster Resource, always doing good stuff. They project Jordan Montgomery to be their in the bullpen as a long relief guy, whereas in the rotation it's Zach Gallen, Merrill Kelly, Eduardo Rodriguez, who they're really hoping will bounce back and have a healthy year and get back to what they signed him for. But then they've got Brandon Pfaadt, who made 32 starts, had a decent year, and then Ryan Nelson as their fifth. Again, another solid year. That rotation needs work, like you said, and it's mostly contingent on some guys bouncing back to what they could be because injuries really hurt them last year. But beyond that, who can really step in for that Diamondbacks team to keep their window open going into 2025 and beyond?
Yeah, I to a less publicized degree, the same conversation about Jordan Montgomery can be had about Eduardo Rodriguez,
Yeah.
who has had his own ups and downs and his own publicity when it comes to kind of his status. But those are two veteran left-handed pitchers that have had major league success, so that adds a little bit more to the equation, at least on paper. I think Slade's has shown, and Sassoni. Sorry if I'm butchering his name, but he's somebody who's come up where they had that first wave of Ryan Nelson, Dre Jameson, and Brandon Pfaadt, and they expect Pfaadt to jump in and start becoming that number two kind of guy atop of
Mhm.
the rotation, which he showed flashes of in the World Series run. He plateaued a little bit, or was still kind of rocky. So you let him learn, you let him develop, and you hope he takes the next step. But that's again another question mark you have with it. There is a little bit of depth that they have with again some of those prospect guys that they can juggle around. But this is just what the Dodgers do, but with a less talented group. The Dodgers can constantly have the veteran 1-year project guys or
Yeah.
the depth signing guys that they can just plug into the rotation anytime and get a lot of success. The Diamondbacks are doing that just with not, the store brand names on there. So um, I think that they're in a better spot than people give them credit for. Again, there's just too many variables. And how much longer is Gallen pitch at an elite level?
Yeah.
Because that's the backbone of the whole thing. Is Zach Gallen is that de facto ace, and not every team gets to have that starting point, especially if they have pitching question marks. So that kind of puts a clock on the whole thing.
Yeah, and it's mostly them waiting on a guy in their top 30 prospects. They've got two guys in their top 10 that are pitchers. You've got Gilbert Diaz, who's projected to make his debut, or at least arrive there in 2024, and maybe have more of a spot. They're making a little bit of an appearance. But then you've got Yumin Lin, who the left-hander, he was down in Double A. So that's two guys in your top 10. Then you've got Christian Mena at number 12. And then it's a lot more bottom heavy, more pitchers showing up in their bottom half of their top 30. So it's when can they get that ball rolling and start to position more? Because that window of position players, they've got a core of position players, but now that starting rotations starting to get up there a little bit, getting a little weathered, and when can they start transitioning and find that next great core, their next Zach Gallen, their next Merrill Kelly type of stuff?
Yeah, an outside the box idea that comes just with that question is the way that they acquired Zach Gallen. This isn't an organization, or at least a pitching staff, that's built off of homegrown internal development.
Yeah.
They traded almost in a challenge trade Jazz Chisholm to the Marlins for Zach Gallen, straight up, and that's how they acquired their ace of the future. I think that they could kind of be in that same position because Jordan Lawler had a real lost year last year because of a wrist injury, but he's still a highly polished hitter that's pretty much big league ready. Um, Drew Jones is their number two prospect, and he has a lot of hype, obviously being Andrew Jones's son. But he's had his own health issues to start his pro career in the minors, so there's a lot of questions that still remain around Drew Jones. Could one of these guys, be flipped for reinforcements for the pitching staff in the more immediate? I think Lawler still is their starting shortstop of the future, but I think Jones is somebody they could, consider flipping, especially to maybe still like Miami is, hungry for offense. So that could be, that cornerstone piece of the Marlins' future, and maybe they walk out of there with, one of the talented arms that Miami always seems to produce. So that could be a path for them to explore this offseason.
Yeah, so it's less so do they have enough depth in the starting rotation that they could trade, a pitcher or something, but it's more so what's the depth like position player wise to help reinforce that rotation and strengthen that depth a little bit more, which I think is what most teams would probably see as a more viable path. It's like I said, the Diamondbacks haven't really shown a great process or development system for pitchers. It hasn't really panned out, and so it's really been built on guys outside of the organization. Top 3 in their projected rotation, yeah, a trade and then a free agent from the KBO and Zach Gallen, free agent in Eduardo Rodriguez, Jordan Montgomery's in there, and then you've got a 5th round pick, a 2nd round pick. There needs to maybe be a little bit more, and perhaps trading one of those prospects could really be what helps strengthen and fill out some of those holes for them.
Yeah. And points to them for creativity,
Yeah,
because ultimately, if it's not working out, you have to come up with other ways. It's not that they haven't drafted pitchers, in the past 15 years. It's just the fact that the development, hasn't worked out as planned, so they've gone other ways. The Diamondbacks are just in an interesting place because, again, we mentioned that Zach Gallen is kind of that backbone of the pitching side. Ketel Marte sure feels like, at least, if not the backbone, then
yeah.
Corbin Carroll is a critical number 2 in the whole process. But he's 30 now. How much more are you going to be in the peak years of Ketel Marte too? So I think that that's another um, point in the direction of making a move to help the present, maybe at the expense of the future a little bit, because you just got to the World Series. Man, World Series windows don't usually last 8 years, and
Yeah.
it probably arrived a little bit sooner for Arizona than they expected, but you're here now. So you got to do something to make the most of it, is the way I see Arizona.
Yeah, most definitely. But they're an interesting team because they made it to that World Series, had a good second half in 2024, but now they're kind of a team with still a lot of questions of who are they? Who are the Snakes? And 2025 is going to be interesting for them.
Mhm.
Uh, moving right along here, someone we want to touch on real quick, and then we'll get to our last topic. Uh, Kenneth, besides probably Roki Sasaki, potentially, maybe, likely, who knows, signing with the Dodgers. Do the Dodgers have any big moves left in them this offseason?
I think it all depends on what your definition of the word big is. So, yes, to me, where it's going to impact their major league roster and probably their starting lineup for the 2025 season. I think absolutely there's still moves to be made on that front. Do I think that they're going to sign Pete Alonso or Corbin Burns? Probably not, at least on the Burns side of it. Um, it we'll touch on this a little bit more later, but third base is still nothing for sure with them right now.
Mhm.
And one thing that is for sure is the Cardinals surely would like to get rid of Nolan Arenado and that contract. And so that is remaining a very real possibility. And also, hey, Tay Oscars feels like that match made in heaven. Nothing's happened on that front yet. And so a reunion there is an impactful and big move.
Yeah, no, Nolan Arenado seems like that's where he's kind of maybe trying to move some chess pieces. Nixed a trade reportedly to the Astros, saying, not right now. I don't want to do that." And so he's wanted to look for that best place for him to land, a team that's ready to compete. And it seemed like he's been destined to go to the Dodgers for a while. May take a little bit more creativity. They might have to kick in some money, but it's mostly going to be coming from the Cardinals. But yeah, I feel like there's something. If they don't get Sasaki, if they somehow don't get Sasaki, I think then that's where they're going to pivot to another big drastic move type of thing. But yeah, there's there's a lot for them to do still, and they're the Dodgers. They can get it done.
Yeah, I think that some improvements will happen with some guys they already have on hand. Bobby Miller was basically a non-factor last year. I think he'll be back into it. Some full season ish of Tyler Glass now could be expected. I don't think Bueller has re-signed, and I think he's
No,
still on
he's
the
still a
market.
free agent.
So something, they could find an agreement on that. I think Sasaki, to a degree, is having your cake and eating it too, a little bit for the Dodgers. But I, think they still would be disappointed if he doesn't opt to sign with them. But I don't think they're going to do anything seismic that gets out of their plan. And
Yeah,
there's always been a hint, nudge, nudge from Arenado to go back to Southern California on the roots, and Dodgers fans have also just been in a championship window the entire time of his career.
yeah,
And so that has always, the bond has always been there for that. I think that probably will come true. However, it was kind of surprising to see him veto the Astros. It's not
mhm,
that it's that unappealing of a destination. And the more I thought about it, the more the better of a match it was,
yeah,
with the writing on the wall of Bregman leaving. But other than you just using leverage because you have it, what? Why wouldn't you want to go to Houston unless you're wanting to go specifically to an LA? Or
yeah,
who knows? Maybe he wants to go to Tampa Bay and never said. Nobody bothered to ask. But like that's a curious one that I would like
yeah.
to sink my teeth into a little bit more.
No, he was a match to the Astros that I had. Of like, it seems like a good fit. If
Hmm.
they don't bring back Bregman, hey, you get a guy who's pretty much on par in a way, in a lot of ways, and it's a good match. But I guess there's just some he didn't like, or apparently reportedly Katie Wu saying like it's just too early in the off season. So it's no for now. Maybe something comes together in these before spring training again, and
Hmm.
he comes around on the idea of going to the Astros. But it's pretty interesting. But yeah, St. Louis would have chipped in probably around $15 to $20 million on that deal. And hey, I'm sure the Dodgers would probably tell him, "Hey, we'll restructure your contract and defer it to infinity
Hmm. And beyond.
and
Uh,
beyond."
Nolan's pretty well been worth the money of the
Yeah,
contract, at least in terms of performance. But it's funny just how many amendments have come into this contract.
yeah,
Since it got signed originally with the Rockies. It's just been a funky deal over the life of it, for just a player, removing all the emotions of a Rockies fan aside from, the start of it all.
yeah. But it'll be interesting. I think the Dodgers they still have something cooking. They're always looking to improve. No rest for the weary, and they're never resting. They're always looking for those ways to improve their team. And Nolan, as much as we don't like the thought at times, he would be an improvement for him over there at the hot corner, especially with the glove.
Yeah.
No more of
I
that next Muncie stuff.
I also see them probably being in the market for a shortstop. Him Adames to the Dodgers always made a whole lot of sense, and so that's something we haven't really touched on in the conversation about the Giants landing him. It's not so much the impact that Adames makes for the Giants, but the impact that Adames makes by not being on the Dodgers. That there's that part of it too. So I think there could be some creativity that happens with shortstop. Um, I guess for Rockies fans, this is going to be cringeworthy. But if they really want to get creative, and if Boston really wants to get rid of the money, they could reunite Story and Arenado on the left side of the infield for the Dodgers. But
Yeah,
that would be a special circle of hell for Rockies fans.
yeah, but that's definitely a conversation we'll have to have here in these next couple weeks. Like, what's going on with the middle infield for the Dodgers, aside from Mookie Betts, I guess being the shortstop?
I
What's
think
going on
they're
with
just
Cam Lodge?
gonna. I think they're gonna form him into one position directly up the middle. It's gonna be
Yeah,
like a rover. They're just gonna reinvent the 9 positions on the baseball field because Mookie just plays middle infield.
they're just gonna just show him that Bugs Bunny cartoon and like Mookie, we need you to do all of this.
Exactly. He's just popping up like a prairie dog out of the ground, snatching ground balls on both sides of the bag.
Hey, if Mookie could do it, he'll find a way.
What a crazy career. We'll never see anybody who's like 35 years old, going from right field to shortstop while still putting up MVP numbers.
Yeah.
Like, this was the weird thing about a Robin Yount back in the day or something like that. These guys never come along now, and we're seeing Mookie do it. That's wild to
Yeah.
me.
It's an incredible player. If only it wasn't with the Dodgers like everybody else.
Yeah.
But oh well. But last thing we wanted to touch on here before we close out this episode of Best of the West, we're putting ourselves in we're putting on our GM hats here and spending other people's money as always. But they're not the Oakland Athletics more. The Athletics, the A's with no name. They're in the market. They've been aggressive, trying to maybe improve their roster, maybe just to try and get people to come and get as much money as they can from this weird season they're about to have with their location in Sacramento and everything. But sounds like they're looking for third baseman. Which National League West team could offer the best fit for the A's if they wanted to go the trade route? And so each of these teams in the National League West, they've got some options here, at least a couple of them who could be looking at that. First one up on the list, we got Eugenio Suarez from the Diamondbacks. What do you think about Suarez heading over to the A's?
I think that Suarez honestly is a bigger piece of Arizona than we give credit for
Yeah,
on the outside. And when we touched on, probably losing Christian Walker to free agency, sliding Suarez to the opposite side of the diamond could answer that question and really be some harm reduction in Christian Walker departing via free agency. So um, whenever we talk about the Athletics, it's all almost building from the ground up entirely,
yeah,
aside from like Mason Miller. So anybody's going to be an improvement for the most part. So yeah, Suarez is going to be helpful, but I think that Suarez makes a lot of sense sticking with Arizona's roster currently.
yeah. And he had a really good year with the Diamondbacks. Improved his walk rate. Like the Mariners traded him because of his kind of strikeout numbers,
Hmm.
and he kind of improved a little bit there with the Diamondbacks. And so, yeah, I think he's a big piece, and maybe one they're not really open to moving because, yeah, he's that veteran kind of backbone piece in that lineup.
Yeah,
And
I
if
I
they lose
think
Christian Walker, he's a nice stability piece to replace that Christian Walker.
Yeah, I think you can't not be open to moving a 35-year-old
Yeah,
corner infielder, but at the same time, I think that there's just more of a glue factor.
yeah,
I think with Suarez that he's established in his time with Arizona, than some other names that we'll have on this list.
yeah. So yeah, I don't think maybe Arizona's not a good fit for them just because he's a good piece for them.
It could make some sense, don't get me wrong. There again with Lawler being in the pipeline, it's not that you couldn't have ways to make it work. But if you have the Diamondbacks and you're trying to strike in this window of contention, Suarez does that more than getting rid of Suarez for
Yeah,
somebody that, can fit in, your 5 to 10 prospect range or something.
yeah. It just opens up more questions on an already infield influx of that's
Mhm.
trying to get solidified. Here's one that an interesting one. Ryan McMahon. Could the A's be like, hey, Colorado, we'll take that third baseman from you for a couple years?
I think if you just remove the Colorado part, yes, it could make some sense for the Athletics to come out and look at acquiring Ryan McMahon and creating a little bit of balance in that lineup. I don't think the Rockies would trade Ryan McMahon for the cure for cancer. Like I don't think the Rockies are willing to trade Ryan McMahon almost
Yeah,
at all for anything unless it's Paul Skeens.
yeah. Hey, I'll do that trade.
Yeah.
Uh,
Drag twist my arm, sure. So yeah, I think McMahon, with the state of where the Rockies are at currently, is someone that they should have traded at the trade deadline this past season because that second half was brutal, and that's pretty much just a representation of the player he is, hot and cold.
yeah,
Comes out to a sub contact on base and some power guy.
yeah,
It's always going to be that, and so some teams would like to add that, but they're never going to do it at what the price the Rockies are asking.
yeah. And it just kind of off topic with that, man, if the Dodgers didn't go for a Nolan Arenado, a Ryan McMahon would be very attractive, I think, to them, just from a defensive standpoint. And then we just expect guys to get improved when they go to the Dodgers.
Yeah.
He would really fits in nicely with them, but it's a trade the Rockies probably would never do in division.
Oh, God, no. I don't and this is a great Patrick question. I would love to know the last Dodgers-Rockies trade, especially one that impacted, a starting lineup. It's pretty tough, I
Was
feel
it
like.
the Juan Nicasio?
So I didn't have Nicasio specifically as the name coming to mind, but, I thought of Yency Almonte too.
Yeah.
I can't remember if Yency had some stops or not. But
Yeah, that was just a signing or claim by them.
yeah, regardless, the Rockies would die of dysentery if they watched Ryan McMahon just raise a World Series trophy and have an All-Star year with the Dodgers.
Suddenly hit those 30 home runs we've been hearing about for
Yeah.
8 years.
Mhm. So, no, there's no way. But with the Athletics, so, one name, and I'll jump on this list a little bit because what bugs me about the Athletics and their current situation is a lot of this comes from their weaseling with the city of Oakland.
Yeah.
But if the Athletics don't spend major money this offseason, they're gonna carry just a bottom feeder payroll for however many years in a row, and they'll be facing another suit from the players' union for basically not spending. So listening to, Baseball America today, I think 105 million was, like, the target for a payroll. So I think that that's part of the motivation for the Athletics is to add money
Yeah.
so they don't get their slap on the wrist.
Yeah.
So, one that could make sense is Xander Bogaerts,
Hmm.
who has just been not the right puzzle piece in the box. It feels like for San Diego a little bit. So if you could see them being motivated to get out of that money, and Oakland needs to start adding payroll, I could see that. I could definitely see that actually being a real world situation that plays out.
Yeah, I think that's the when if they wanted to like add a bunch of money, hey, and kind of help out their payroll, we'll get Bogarts, and yeah, it gives them a nice veteran presence for the rest of their young team, and he can maybe move around that middle infield bits. He could play second, short, slide him over to third because let's Bogart's getting paid about 25.4 million a year through his contract, and so that's through 2033. So
That's a
the
lot to take on.
yeah,
But
that would be
yeah.
a lot to take on. So the Padres maybe probably have to kick in quite a bit of money or just sweeten the pot with what no maybe have to throw in some other kickers to get them to take on that money. But in a world, you could see how that could work. And then if
Mm.
they ever actually do get to Vegas, whenever that is, hey, we've got this notable player. He's older now.
Former all-star
Yeah.
Xander Bogaerts.
Yeah. So yeah, I do like that match a little bit, just in terms of what you're saying of the A's trying to have payroll reach a minimum and just maybe kind of keep them up through several more years through 2033, or at least over a couple years, and then maybe try to flip him somewhere else, type of thing. So that one could work. The other one was on this list, one with the Dodgers of Chris Taylor, who is a lot more of a short term one, very short term, but another kind of gritty veteran guy who's maybe not a big name, but he's a solid player, versatile, kind of fits into that A's mold of hey, here's this veteran that we can have that's
Mhm.
ups our payroll a little bit.
Yeah, little gritty ball player. My gut would say no, but if the Dodgers can move on from Kike Hernandez, at least in the middle of
Mhm.
his time there, before reacquiring him, they could move on from Chris Taylor too. I think that he's just been such a consistent role player for them for so long that I think that they want him to go down with the ship when the time comes. But yeah, I would never say never on that. And if they wanted to trim some fat off the roster, of course
Yeah.
Taylor is a little expendable.
Yeah, and that maybe gets their bench a little more youthful.
Mhm.
Currently projected to have Austin Barnes, who's 35, Miguel Rojas, who's 30, almost 36. And then you have James Outman, who's almost 28. And then Chris Taylor, who's just a little over 34. So
Yeah.
maybe infuse a little bit of youth in that roster.
The Major League Baseball equivalent of seeing DeAndre Jordan on the Nuggets bench.
Yeah.
Just hanging out, been eating nachos since the first quarter.
But yeah, the A's are an interesting team, and there's definitely some options because there's across these National League West teams, there's options of what they could replace their guys with. Kyle Karros or Charlie Condon, someone getting closer to take over at third base for Ryan McMahon. With the Diamondbacks, you've got Perdomo, you've got Lawler. You can shuffle them around on that infield. Xander Bogaerts can shuffle around. He's probably maybe the toughest one to move. I think Matt Chapman is not going back to the A's. He would stay with the Giants. He would not want to go back across that bay, especially with their current situation. So maybe the National League West isn't the best fit for the A's with the third base. There's other options, I'm sure, and other position holes they could fill. But third base, it feels like third base is, aside from the Dodgers, pretty firmed up for most of these National League West teams going into 2025.
Yeah, and it's been a consistent position, and even if you are the Dodgers too, Max Muncy has been, you've been there and done that with Muncy, and so it's not even that they're in the worst spot in the world either. The Athletics, we'll see when they start trying to put a competent team together again. There were some surprising players that came out of that group last year. Seeing Blade turn into kind of a real major league hitter was cool to see. And then Rooker and Butler were a very surprising 3-4. So they have some fun players, and I think that they're not far away from being a fun team to watch. But they could definitely just use some veteran support around the edges. So again, if it's not going to hurt adding a Suarez or anybody of that caliber to Oakland or to the Athletics, it'll make them more competitive. But they're years out from contending for sure.
Yeah, with the A's, they are the team itself fun, good. Everything else surrounding the team awful.
Yeah, pretty much. We know that. We know that all too well. Though, so we don't need to pick at that wound.
But yeah, fun stuff. And quick to wrap up this conversation, Patrick, our good pals, coming in clutch here. The last trade between the Rockies and Los Angeles was Juan Nicasio for Noel Cuevas. That trade worked out pretty well for Nicasio, who continued to have a good little solid career after that.
Mm-hmm.
But probably the best trade back in 1997 when the Rockies got Pedro Estacio for EY Sr. back in August of 1997.
Yep, and I think I will one up or add on to Patrick's lovely bits of information where the Rockies got EY Sr. from the Dodgers organization in the first place during the expansion draft. So, but whether or not that was a trade, I can't remember.
Yeah. But fun stuff. But that'll do it here for this edition of Best of the West. Appreciate you tuning in and following along with us and figuring out our format with this new show. We'll figure out that timing and everything. We just like to talk. We get growing, Kenneth. It's fun stuff.
That's why it's the banter, man.
There you go. Yes, the banter is built into the name. But Kenneth, where can the folks find you?
I'm over at Purple Row, and then I'm on Twitter at KDub1988.
There you go. Nice and simple. As for me, you can find me over at purplerow.com, writing Wednesday Rock Piles. And then you can find me over on fansfirstsportsnetwork.com, writing just general baseball stuff. And then you can follow me over at Twitter at sideline_crowd or over at Blue Sky. That's stimmons13 at .bsky.social. And I'm not super active during the off season because there's nothing to talk about. But appreciate you following along, and be sure to follow Blake Street Banner over on all your favorite social media platforms and your podcasting platforms, as well as here on YouTube. But until next time, this has been Skylar Timmons and Kenneth Weber here on Best of the West. We'll see you next time.